How could fewer than 10,000 Athenian hoplites face 25,000 Persian warriors and prevail? Why did the greatest empire on earth, with 600 warships at its command, stumble before a single city of free men? What secret turned farmers and craftsmen into a wall of bronze that shattered the pride of kings? The answer lies on the sands of Marathon, where history itself was decided. Every war has a spark. For Persia, that spark was rebellion. In 499 BC, the Ionian Greeks, subjects of the Persian Empire, rose in revolt. Their flames of defiance spread across Asia Minor, and when Athens, a distant but proud city, dared to send ships and men to support them, the insult cut deep. Together, the rebels struck at Sardis, setting fire to a jewel of the empire. King Darius I, ruler of lands from India to Egypt, watched his dominion tremble with rage. To him, Athens had not only meddled in Persian affairs, they had spat upon the throne of the great king. Such insolence could not go unanswered. From that day forward, Darius commanded a servant to whisper to him at every meal, "Sire, remember the Athenians." And he did remember. For 10 long years he prepared. He gathered armies from every corner of his empire, forged alliances, and swore before the gods that Athens would pay, not merely with tribute, but with fire and blood. By 490 BC, his wrath took form. 600 warships cut across the Aegean, black sails swelling in the wind, carrying more than 25,000 men. Veterans from Babylon, archers from Susa, cavalry from the east. The empire itself had been summoned. Their orders were clear: punish Athens, burn its walls, and make Greece kneel. Their chosen landing place was Marathon, a flat plain not far from Athens, where Persian cavalry could ride freely and crush resistance. But what awaited them was not submission. Athens, though small, stood defiant. They had no king, no tyrant, only citizens who would decide their fate together. For them, this was not just survival. This was freedom itself, standing against the might of empire. And so the stage was set. East against west, tyranny against freedom, empire against democracy. On the sands of Marathon, history was about to turn. When news spread that the Persians had landed at Marathon, the call went out across the hills and valleys of Attica. Farmers abandoned their fields, craftsmen laid down their tools, and merchants left their stalls in the agora. Athens was not defended by mercenaries or a royal guard. It was defended by its citizens. Each man who answered the call was a hoplite, a citizen soldier. They provided their own armor, heavy bronze breastplates, greaves to guard their legs, and helmets with horsehair crests that caught the sun. On their left arm, the aspis, a massive wooden shield plated with bronze. In their right hand, the dory, a spear 8 feet long. But they carried more than weapons. They carried the weight of their families, fathers, brothers, sons, knowing that behind them, their loved ones waited in fear. At their head stood Miltiades, one of Athens' 10 generals. Unlike most, he knew the Persians well, having once served under them in the Chersonese. He understood their strengths and their weaknesses. In Athens' Council of Generals, the debate was fierce. Some argued to wait for Sparta, their most powerful ally, whose warriors were renowned across Greece. Others urged delay, fearing annihilation in open battle. But Miltiades spoke with urgency. Every hour makes them stronger. Strike now, while their cavalry is away. At last the decision was made. Athens would march. 10,000 hoplites set out from the city, joined by 1,000 loyal allies from Plataea. Dust rose under their sandals as they advanced toward Marathon. Cresting the hills, they saw the Persian camp stretched across the plain, banners snapping in the wind, weapons glinting like fire, a sea of men awaiting battle. The Athenians established their camp in the foothills, close enough to watch, far enough to hold. For days, the two armies stared at each other across the plain. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable. A waiting game, with the fate of Greece hanging in the balance. For days, the two armies stared across the plain of Marathon. On one side, the Persians waited confidently, certain the Athenians would eventually collapse under fear. On the other, the Athenians stood tense, hoping for Spartan reinforcements that never arrived. Then came a morning that changed everything. Miltiades had studied the Persian camp carefully. He saw what others missed. The Persian cavalry, the core of their strength, had dispersed, perhaps sent on patrol, perhaps being loaded onto ships to maneuver along the coast. Without them, the Persian army was exposed. He called the council of generals. His voice was calm but sharp as steel. If we wait, their cavalry will return and we will be crushed. The gods have given us this chance. We must strike today. At last, the council agreed. Athens would not wait for Sparta. Athens would stand alone. At dawn, the Hoplites prepared. They tightened the straps of their armor. Bronze helmets gleamed in the early light. Shields locked edge to edge. The air smelled of leather, sweat, and oiled metal. Each man thought of his family, his wife, his children, knowing he might never see them again. Miltiades formed his men with cunning. The line stretched nearly a mile wide, but he arranged it unevenly, the wings deep and strong, the center deliberately thinned. It was a dangerous gamble, a trap designed to lure the Persians forward. As the sun rose, silence fell across the plain. Thousands of hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder, shield against shield, forming a living wall of bronze and oak. Each man knew the weight of this moment. If they failed, Athens would burn. If they triumphed, their names would live forever. Across the field, Persian generals Datis and Artaphernes readied their army. Archers raised their bows. Infantry clutched short spears and curved swords. To them, the sight of a small Greek force daring to challenge Persia seemed madness. Then the trumpet sounded. The Athenians advanced at a steady pace, step after step. Then suddenly they broke into a run. Across nearly a mile of open ground, hoplites charged with shields raised and spears leveled, sandals pounding the earth like thunder. The Persians were stunned. Never had an enemy dared such a reckless charge. Archers loosed their arrows, blackening the sky, but the Athenians moved too fast. Arrows thudded into shields, glanced off helmets, and still the line surged forward. The two armies collided with a force that seemed to split the earth itself. Bronze shields slammed into Persian wicker armor. Spears thrust, piercing through cloth and flesh. Curved swords rang against iron and bronze. Horses reared, men screamed, dust and blood filled the air. At the center, the Athenians strained. Their line, deliberately thinned, bent under the sheer weight of Persian numbers. Thousands of enemy infantry pressed forward, stabbing with short spears, slashing with curved blades. Arrows whistled overhead, hissing into shields and armor. Step by step, the Greeks gave ground. The Persians shouted in triumph. Victory seemed within their grasp. The center of the Athenian line was faltering, but this was Miltiades' plan. On the flanks, the wings of the Greek formation held strong. On the left, the Plataeans fought with desperate courage, their shields locked tight, their spears stabbing deep into the massive Persians. On the right, the Athenians pressed forward, slow but unstoppable. Then came the turn. The Greek wings began to push inward, bending like jaws around the Persian center. What had seemed weakness was a trap, the first double envelopment recorded in history. Suddenly, the Persians found themselves surrounded. They were pressed from the front, crushed from both sides with nowhere to escape. Their wicker shields splintered, their light armor shredded by bronze-tipped fury. Panic rippled through their ranks. Officers shouted, trying to rally their men, but their voices drowned in the chaos. Arrows still fell, but now even Persian archers could not tell friend from foe. The hoplites roared as one, their phalanx surging forward like a wall of iron and flesh. Every shield pressed, every spear stabbed, every man driven by the thought of his home, his family, his freedom. The Persians had come expecting an easy victory. Instead, they were being crushed step by bloody step, beneath the weight of a citizen army that refused to break. At first, only a few Persians faltered. A shield slipped. A soldier stumbled backward. A handful of men broke ranks. But panic is like fire in dry grass. Once sparked, it spreads uncontrollably. The Athenians sensed it. With a unified roar, their phalanx surged forward. Shields slammed like rams. Spears struck again and again, driving into the tightly packed mass of Persians. The once mighty line buckled, bending like a bowstring ready to snap. Then it broke. The great army of Persia, tens of thousands strong, turned to flight. Soldiers dropped weapons, trampled comrades, desperate to reach the safety of their ships. The battlefield moments ago filled with the clash of iron, now echoed with screams of terror and the thunder of running feet. The Greeks gave no quarter. They chased their fleeing enemies across the plain. On the left, the Plataeans pressed with ferocity, driving Persians into the marshes where men sank and drowned in the mire. On the right, Athenians cut their foes down, pushing them relentlessly toward the shore. The beaches of Marathon became a slaughterhouse. Persians clawed and shoved their way toward the gangplanks of their ships. Some leapt into the water, their armor dragging them beneath the waves. Others tried to hold the decks, but Hoplites stormed aboard, spears piercing in close combat on the wooden planks. 7 Persian ships were captured or destroyed in the chaos. The rest, in desperation, managed to tear free, their sails snapping in the wind as they fled into the Aegean. When the dust cleared, the Athenians stood victorious on blood-soaked sand. More than 6,000 Persians lay dead. By contrast, fewer than 200 Athenians had fallen. The numbers were staggering, almost unbelievable. Against impossible odds, a citizen army had humbled the mightiest empire on earth. The beaches of Marathon were littered with the dead. More than 6,000 Persians lay scattered across the plain and shoreline. In contrast, only 192 Athenians had fallen. It was a triumph beyond belief. A citizen army, outnumbered more than 2 to 1, had crushed the mightiest empire the world had ever known. But Miltiades knew the danger was not over. Out at sea, the Persian fleet turned south, sailing directly toward undefended Athens. If the city burned, if the families of the Hoplites were taken, then all they had achieved at Marathon would be in vain. So the Athenians did the unthinkable. After a day of brutal combat, after running nearly a mile under arrow fire, after breaking an army twice their size, they did not rest. They marched 30 miles from Marathon back to Athens in a single forced march that pushed men to the very limits of endurance. When the Persian fleet appeared on the horizon, they expected to find the city unguarded. Instead, they saw Hoplites already waiting on the shore, the same men who had slaughtered their comrades only hours before. Shields gleamed in the sun, spears stood ready. The Persians hesitated, then turned away. The invasion was over. Yet one more tale would echo through the centuries. According to legend, a messenger named Phidippides was chosen to carry news of victory. Exhausted but unyielding, he ran from the battlefield all the way to Athens, over 26 miles of relentless ground. He burst into the assembly, gasped out the words, "We have won!" and collapsed, dead from exhaustion. Whether myth or truth, his story became immortal. 2,000 years later, it gave birth to the modern marathon race, a living symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and human spirit. The Battle of Marathon was more than a military victory. It was a declaration that free men standing shoulder to shoulder could defeat the greatest empire on earth, that courage, discipline, and unity could overcome impossible odds. For Athens, it proved democracy could endure. For Persia, it was the beginning of a long struggle with Greece, one that would echo at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. And for history, Marathon was a turning point, a moment when ordinary men chose to fight, to endure, and to run into legend.